Everyone, I'm Jane. I'm a research officer and data scientist here at Swansea University. I've been a SAIL user for 9 years now, and I'm the social justice research lead for Administrative Data Research Wales. So today I'm going to be presenting on one of our multimorbidity efforts that has utilised the Wales Multimorbidity e-Cohort, or WMC for short, to measure trajectories in chronic disease, accrual and mortality for the population of Wales, with the interest in looking at differences in outcomes between socioeconomic groups. So I previously worked with HDR UK on the multimorbidity work programme for the first round of funding, and I still work closely with HDR UK colleagues, but I now work for ADR Wales. When I was working for the multimorbidity work stream, I was tasked with creating the Wales Multimorbidity e-Cohort. And so this cohort contains all individuals living in Wales on the 1st of January 2000, with follow-up until death, residency break or study end date, which was the 31st of December 2019. And we utilised the WDS, which is our demographic data, the WLGP, our GP data, and ADDE, which is our ONS death register, to capture residency and then be able to adjust for appropriate follow-up. So as you can see, the WMC contains 2.9 million people with a minimum follow-up of 1 day and a maximum follow-up of 20 years. And we use published comorbidity indices and phenotype code lists, such as Charlson, Alexhauser, Caliber, to measure and conceptualize multimorbidity. So the reason for this work was to create basically a research platform for HDR colleagues across the UK to use to support their multimorbidity research. And a nice example is actually going to be shown this morning as Professor Rhiannon Owen, who was also presenting, is going to use this cohort for analysis. And she was also the statistical lead for this study that I'm about to go into now. And we've published our protocol on the WMC, if you want to read a bit more about it in detail. So moving on to this particular study, I've always been interested in inequalities research and measuring health disparities, and I'm fortunate now to be funded in this area by ADR Wales. So in this study, we used the WMC, and our aim was to measure chronic disease accrual and examine the differences in time to individual morbidities, so single disease diagnoses, multimorbidity, so 2 or more diagnoses, and mortality between socioeconomic groups in Wales. So for this study, we used the Caliber disease phenotype register to include actually 132 diseases that were then captured in the GP and inpatient data sets. We excluded individuals who had any of these 132 disease diagnoses between 2000 and 2004 to allow for a 5-year clearance. So individuals started from this chronic disease-free state or healthy state, and then we could capture first disease diagnosis from the 1st of January 2005. So then to measure, so to measure deprivation, we use the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation Income Quintiles at the LSOA level. And so this study used multi-state models, which Rhiannon will be going into a bit more detail in her talk. And this allowed us to model trajectories of chronic disease accrual, accounting for death as a competing risk. We applied a 4-state model with all individuals starting at this chronic disease-free state. And from that state, individuals can transition to single chronic morbidity, multimorbidity, or death, with a possible of 6 transitions, which can then be seen in the diagram. So you could obviously, from healthy, you could go to 1 disease diagnosis, or straight to 2, or you could actually go straight to death. And then when you had 1 disease diagnosis, you could then have a 2nd or more disease diagnosis or death. And then when you became multimorbid, the only next state possible was death. And so all models were adjusted for age, sex, and area level deprivation. And we calculated restricted mean survival time for all possible transitions from entry to each health state to measure the time spent in years between health states. And that allowed us to examine the speed of transition between states and subsequently then demonstrate the differences in time to develop in chronic disease or diseases or dying between our socioeconomic groups. And so this is an overview of our study population broken down by the 6 possible transitions, and then by area level deprivation, sex and age. And so in total, our study ended up including 965,905 individuals, with the most common transition being chronic disease-free to morbidity, which you can see here. And then also, as you'd expect, the majority of our individuals who did die during the study had already been diagnosed with at least 2 chronic diseases. So for time, I'm just going to show you our outputs for the 70-year-olds. So the trajectory column shows the 6 possible transitions between states, and then the restricted mean survival time for individuals living across the different area level deprivations. So you've gone from most deprived there to least deprived, and then our final column shows the differences in time between the most and least deprived areas in Wales. And so as you can see here, across all ages, which we haven't, it's in the paper if you'd like to look, individuals living in the most deprived areas consistently experienced accelerated time to chronic disease diagnosis and death compared to their demographic equivalent living in the least deprived areas of Wales. And so just using the bottom row as an example, you can see here when looking at multimorbidity to death, 70-year-old males who have been diagnosed or have multimorbidity living in the most deprived areas of Wales are dying 2 years sooner than a 70-year-old male who also has multimorbidity but living in the least deprived area. So you've got this time between the different health states. So least deprived person has got on average 10.82 years before they die, compared to a more deprived individual where it only took 8.84 years. And so this is just some data visualizations from the study. The figure on the top row shows the cumulative incidence of multimorbidity for 10, 40 and 70-year-old females. And the bottom shows the cumulative incidence of mortality for 10, 40 and 70-year-olds by deprivation quintiles. And you can see that over time, there is a steepening of the gradient, in particular for the mortality when comparing individuals in the most deprived versus the least deprived. And these are the different trajectories. So you can see this is morbidity to multimorbidity and healthy to multimorbidity here. And then these are our 3 transitions and trajectories. So healthy to death, you expect less than morbidity to death, and then obviously multimorbidity to death there. And so then this is some figures again from our study, and these are mirror plots which demonstrate the time spent in each state. Here again, we are showing 10, 40 and 70-year-olds. And these are the females on the top row, and then 10, 40 and 70-year-old males at the bottom. And as you can see, individuals living in the most deprived areas spend the least amount of time in the healthy or chronic disease-free state, and subsequently spend more time in chronic disease states and death states, which is again easier to see when looking at the older age groups, as we've got more individuals are more likely to die at an older age. You can see this is the death, multimorbidity, morbidity, but really looking here is the amount of time spent in the healthy state, which is less than our least deprived individuals. So this was just a showcase of basically using our research platform, which was the WMC, and then applying a research question to this platform. So yeah.